Welcome to episode number 90 for the National Land Realty Podcast, where we discuss all things land. Our goal here is to inform, educate, and entertain those of you who own land or are interested in the buying and selling of land throughout the United States. My name is Mac Christian, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer here at National Land Realty. I'll be your host for this episode. Now, the Texas Panhandle, like many areas of the United States, has experienced its share of drought conditions over the years. Grazing cattle in drought conditions may seem like an insurmountable challenge, but as we're about to find out, there are ways to not only thrive, but to prosper. Mike Turner manages Blue Ranch near Amarillo, Texas. He's developed methods for high-intensity, low-frequency grazing, and managing his ranch is, in Mike's words, a chance to do something that hadn't been done before. Mike Turner has a level of experience that you simply don't find every day. He is a master of the craft. Mike is here today to discuss how he manages this highly successful ranch, and trust me, this is worth listening to. Now sit back and enjoy. All right, so I am here with Mike Turner, and Mike is located in Moore County, Texas. He works with Rex and Susan McCloy on the Blue Ranch. And Mike, they've been at this for a while, around what you said, 120 years. And you are the ranch and resource manager. And I like your other title. You said the CCBW. And for those of you that are not familiar with that acronym, it is the Chief Cook and Bottle Washer. So you handle everything for this ranch. And we're going to get into some of the practice that you've implemented. You've received awards on stewardship and water resource management. And we'll get into some of that. But I want to ask you sort of, how did you get into this in the first place? How did you get into not just managing this ranch, but ranching in general?
Well, thank you again, Mike, for having me on. I have been in agriculture most of my adult life, and started out at an early age being around horses, and that was one thing that I wanted to do just about every day was get home and go ride a horse. And didn't want to be in school, I knew that, but anyhow, it kind of started from there, and we had a small ranch farm operation in Palapena County where I grew up, just between Lipan and Santo, Texas. And we lived in Tarrant County, but we spent all of our weekends and hours that we could on the home place. And that instilled in me my love of agriculture. And, one of the things that I still remember today is that to me, it was an honorable profession. And I get pretty emotional about it, but I've had the opportunity to do this now for going on 30 years. And, I still like what I do. And that's what I tell young people, do something you're passionate about. You're not going to like it every day, but, do something that makes you feel proud that you're doing something. And for us, we're managing resources, and we're taking care of what God's entrusted us with. And that being said, we manage grass and we manage cattle, and we try to do that to the best of our ability.
So did you start out in this working in the operation and then starting working for other people's operations, or how did you kind of carry your career into where you are now, which is managing the whole ranch?
Well, I started out in my early career as a working cowboy, and that was the thing that I wanted to do. Was I wanted to be the best cowboy I could, and ride the best horses. I watched all them old men that gave the orders, and they always rode the best horses, and everybody looked up to them. And I thought at an early age, I said, there's something to be to that right there. I don't want to just be a good cowboy. I want to be the guy that calls the shots. And I did my undergraduate at Tarleton State in agriculture. Did some graduate work at Texas A&M Kingsville through the King Ranch program. And all of that being said, I had an opportunity to go to work for the U.S. Department of Agriculture with the Natural Resource Conservation Service. And spent several years with them. And one of the things that I always say that the best thing that I took away from working for USDA and NRCS was it made me a better grass manager and land steward. I thought I was a good cowman and manager, but after my years with NRCS, it helped me considerably on the grass management side of it, and actually see it as a resource to be managed and not just to be mined and used. I guess that makes sense.
For somebody that just said they didn't school all that much, it sure sounds like you did a lot of school.
Well, I was your non-conventional student, to say the least. But one thing I was able to do, I was able to finish my education, and but I knew that it was just a stepping stone to what I wanted to do further on in my career.
Gotcha. Okay. So how did you fall in at the Blue Ranch then?
So I was still with USDA, and again, I managed multiple ranches throughout my career, and I've been everywhere from the stocker to the seed stock business. I spent about 14 years of my career in the seed stock industry and developing bulls and heifers and working for registered operations. And after I got out of graduate school and went to work for USDA. I wasn't sure whether I'd go back into the private sector or not, and had an opportunity after many years with USDA. Some folks contacted me, and I come up here and with the intent of saying thank you very much. I'm content with my career with USDA, and when I got up here, I thought, man, you'd be an idiot if you didn't do it. They had spent the time to put in the infrastructure, design the ranch, and lay it out. And in my mind, I knew this thing would work. And so I told the owners, I said, it didn't matter who you hire. I will tell you this. I don't care how much money you spend on the operation. If they're not 100% on board with what you're trying to accomplish, it will fail. And at the time, I didn't have any skin in the game, so I didn't, if it hurt their feelings, I wasn't trying to, but I was just trying to be honest with it. But I was lucky enough to end up with the position, and we've been here 9 years now, and we've watched this ranch change exponentially from the forage production that's on there today versus what we had 9 years ago. And and it's been an awesome opportunity to be able to manage this. We worked a lot with this when I was with USDA, and we designed grazing systems, and we taught about grazing systems, and a lot of them were a lot smaller scale. The operation I'm on is 35 square miles, and so we went from a free pasture ranch to 64 grazing cells on here. So when I came up here to look at the operation, I thought, man, this thing will work, but the right person's got to be involved with it. So, and again, I was fortunate enough to be able to be in that position.
Yeah. So what in particular caught your eye when you're coming in, like you're working with the USDA at the time, but like you're very good at figuring out what you see in a ranch that's going to be a good operation. When you walk in there, you mentioned that they had the infrastructure in place. What was it about that infrastructure that caught your eye that you thought could be successful?
Well, the fact that it was so well thought out, and the manager at the time that ran our New Mexico division, he had worked with some savory systems in the 70s and early 80s, and one of the things that his big takeaway was that when everybody else ran out of grass, these operations still had grass. And so that being said, the owners had talked with many individuals with USDA and in the private sector that had done some rotational grazing systems, had set up grazing cells, and so they gleaned all the information that they could out of these resources to be able to put this system together, and it was functional. I mean, it wasn't fancy, but the thing about it, it was functional, and the biggest thing that we do now is just balancing our stocking rate with our forage production, and that was the biggest takeaway is that if you get those two right, you can still produce grass and be able to utilize your forage base that's available to you. And that was one of the things that really, I guess, uh, interested me about it, because I thought, we can make this thing work. And we had talked about one herd rotations with USDA. I had an opportunity to put it into practice.
Okay,
and felt like it's been very beneficial for me.
Yeah, so I want to get in and add. I want to pick in and ask you about the stocking rate versus forage production that you've established, but I want to kind of work my way from the ground up here. From you jumped in, they kind of gave you the offer, and you've taken this ranch that started out with good infrastructure, and you've created something that's producing grass. And you were talking about the rainfall that you've had since December is, let's call it, minimal. and you've managed to have a place that is producing a high level of forage. How did you take from where it was when you came on board, and just kind of explain to anybody listening what you've created here?
Well, so what we've tried to do is we've tried to make the operation better than what we found it. Okay, that's our mantra, to do no harm. And but the other side of that is you've got to be able to utilize the forage base that's there. And when we first started stocking this ranch, we were still fairly conservatively stocked. But historically, the previous family that owned this ranch for 115 years, and it was eventually ranched. It was a 16 pasture ranch at one time, and conventionally ranched, where they had handful of cattle in every pasture, and usually due to either forage or water constraints, would move cattle if they needed to or if they had to. So that being said, once we were able to get the infrastructure put in, like I was talking about, my goal was, when I first came on board, we had multiple herds on the ranch. I put everything together because in my mind, and what we had been taught and had seen, we wanted to maximize our animal impact on a small area. So we were able to maximize our stocking density without necessarily buying a whole lot of animal units to put on there. And so when we started the one herd rotation, we were able to condense that herd into a large volume into a small area and maximize the forage utilization that was available. And I think I said before, we've got 66 grazing cells now, so they average 320 acres per grazing cell. And when I'm running, the most we've run is about 600 pairs at one time. We're maximizing our animal units per acre on there, and we can harvest as much forage as we can take off there without doing damage to it in a short duration. And one of the things that we try to do with that is we're training those cows as well to eat some of the less desirable species. On big pastures with moderate numbers, cattle will cherry pick what they want to. And one of the things that we try to avoid is we don't want them to overutilize and underutilize forage. And when we do that with large volume and smaller paddock sizes, they have to kind of go in there and take a bite of everything that's there. And that helps them out. There's a lot of things. We see adverse conversations, I guess, for lack of a better term, about undesirable species of forage and or woody species that can be toxic to animals, and that is true. But we produce the same things over here. We're 100% rangeland conditions, and animals will eat those, but they'll eat them in small quantities because their body usually tells them, "Hey, we need something different. There's a mineral composition there that we need. We'll take a bite of that." It's generally when they're naive animals and or stressed animals when they can overconsume that type of forage, and then they have adverse conditions, and those are the things that you usually hear about. But what we try to do is we're trying to train that animal to take a bite of everything that's there, and once they've gone through the rotation throughout their career here on the animals, those animals are pretty good about going in and taking a little bit of everything. You won't see a uniform utilization of forage, but you'll see them taking a lot of stuff that our textbooks always say that they won't eat. Well, I promise you they will eat it, but just small quantities.
So you mentioned before you started out with, when you got to the Blue Ranch, they had 35 cells, and you've almost doubled that. Is that part of the plan, or is that based?
No, when I first got here, they actually had 3 pastures on this ranch from the previous owners, and so they had 3 pastures on this ranch. So we basically had an 8,000 acre pasture, a 9,000 acre pasture, and somewhere around a 2,200 acre holding trap right in the middle of it. And it had run stockers on here, and had no interior infrastructure, intermittent windmills and or retrofitted solar wells. And it looked like it'd been hammered pretty good when the owners first bought it. But they set into implementing infrastructure, pipelines for water, storage facilities, and then water troughs. And and now we've got a 66 paddock grazing system. I've got 36 cell centers, which a cell center is going to be where a water trough is located.
Okay, that's okay. I think that's what I picked up on there. Okay.
Okay. But, so with that in place, we're able to utilize the forage that's there and rotate those animals into a location that they normally wouldn't spend a lot of time in. But water always being your biggest Achilles heel in any ranching operation. If you've got the water and water distributed correctly, you can utilize a lot of the stuff that is available there.
So in your area, we talked about it. The rainfall and drought conditions have kind of carried through, and Amarillo area I know has kind of like been going through that. How do you approach it? How do you establish how much water you're going to need, and how do you partition that and conserve?
Well, one of the things that we do, I've got some live water. I've got some perennial creeks on the ranch. We're very fortunate that there's a handful of those in the panhandle, and I actually have 2 of them on the ranch, Blue Creek and Running Water Creek. Those areas down there, we utilize those in our riparian areas the best that we can. And but with our water, I've got water holding facilities established on the ranch. We've got a 60,000 gallon tank on the north end of the ranch and 60,000 gallons on the south end of the ranch, and they're all tied in with water line. And we've got approximately 48 miles of water line in place to these 3,000 gallon water troughs. And again, those are going to be associated with what we call a cell center on the ranch. And that's usually a convergence point of the pastures where they can utilize water and then go to the next pasture.
Gotcha. And you've received a few awards for stewardship when it comes down to it. Tell me what about those awards and sort of what they were looking at to sort of gauge on awarding it to you. Like how did that process go, and what were they looking at?
Matt, thank you again. That's a great question. The awards that we received were from the Texas section of the Society of Range Management. For 2023, we won the Outstanding Rangeland Stewardship Award, and for the 2024 year, the Texas and Southwestern Cattle Raisers Award for Outstanding Environmental Stewardship. And so both of those awards are peer reviewed. They are that you are nominated by your peers in the industry. We had multiple professors. I work with multiple universities and schools and Texas AgriLife A lot of those individuals who've been on our ranch, they were the ones that made nomination for us, and it's very humbling, gratifying too, to be recognized by your peers in the industry. But the one thing that with the Environmental Stewardship Award, we're trying to utilize the natural resources that we have on the ranch, which is going to be forage and water usage, and those are things that we don't take lightly. I try to tell people that if I've grazed a pasture and I can tell it, then I'm okay with it. But if I graze a pasture and somebody else can tell that I've grazed it, I've probably been in there too long. So my goal is not how much I take off of there; it's how much I leave behind. And I think for any operation to be successful, you've got to leave something behind for that next growing season. And it's the same thing with our water table. If we deplete that water table down to a point, it takes a long time for those things to recharge. And we've done a lot of work in our riparian areas on the ranch that, we feel like we've better utilized that water resource down there. We've got more springs that are actually delivering more water than they had in the past. And we've taken some woody encroachments in the bottom and been able to thin a lot of that canopy out down in the bottoms, and that way we're not using as much water. I know when we completed a restoration project about 7 years ago now, and our neighboring ranch told us that they hadn't had that much water flowing on them in 35 years. So I feel like we made some impact down there, and that's all part of the Blue Creek watershed that goes into our Lake Meredith, which is part of the Canadian River water system.
Does the water allotment there, you were talking about your neighbor, do you have priority on the water and they're downstream, and so that you utilizing water better gave them more water?
And that's a good question, but we try. We don't have anything dammed up or anything like that.
Okay.
We were just trying to make it better down there. Mainly, we were trying to open up some corridors for our wildlife as well. And we don't have a big commercial hunting operation, but we do have some wildlife resources that we try to utilize as well. And the biggest thing is I just wanted to be able to see them. I get more of a kick anymore seeing them through a camera lens or through binoculars than I do through a scope. And but when we did that, we were able to open up a lot of that canopy, and and there was the secondary result out of that was, hey, we've got a lot more water production down here than we had in the past.
So how are you assessing that as time goes on, where you're trying to conserve water because it's a finite resource and it's an area where if you use too much, you could get yourself in trouble. How are you gauging the how much water you're using versus how much forage is getting produced? Are you just keeping an eyeball on it, or are you using metrics to kind of measure yourself as you move along?
I don't utilize a lot of the metrics. There are some that are available. I do have a couple of apps that I utilize quite a bit. But as far as water measurement on that aspect, I eyeball a lot of that. But one of the things that I'll go back to is that when I came on board, I told the owners it would take a minimum of 5 years before we started seeing any real changes in our forage dynamics with the amount and the type. So within year 3 with our grazing operation, we started seeing major impact on a lot of our tall grass species coming back in, and not just small pedestals of plants. At one point you could probably count a lot of the pedestals of the tall grass species here. Now, by year 3, we started seeing exponential amounts, and then by year 9 now, we've seen quite a bit where we've changed from a mid to short grass transitional prairie back to a tall grass prairie. And that being said, I think it goes back to better utilization of our water and maximizing our grazing that we've had on there. And again, it's not about how much you take, it's how much you leave behind. And with the properly functioning water system, with a water table, you shouldn't have any runoff whatsoever. We build a lot of water catchment facilities throughout the United States through watersheds. But if you have a properly functioning watershed, you shouldn't have any runoff because you have biomass to capture what is there. So it'll infiltrate back into the water table. But that being said, I think that's part of the reason that we're seeing a lot more water utilization is because we've got a lot more biomass left behind that's capturing what does hit the ground.
So you were able to take, and if I'm hearing you right, because I was curious how you measure the water versus forage and how you kind of do that balance. A lot of what you're working with is really the years of knowledge and education that you have. Like you came in with a good idea as to like, okay, if I did this, this is how I would manage it. And you've been able to kind of steer it according to everything that you have in your head, right?
Right. And a lot of stuff that I've learned along the way. I'm not an intelligent individual by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm smart enough to glean from a lot of smarter individuals that I have surrounded myself with.
You say that, but there's a lot of people that think they're smart that don't listen to those around them. I think it's a true sign of intelligence to actually glean that information off of people. Um, I'm curious about how you are managing your rotation. It's from the sounds of it, you're working with a lot of cells. How often are you rotating from cell to cell? And how do you establish that? I guess is it kind of eyeball to make sure they don't overgraze, or and I don't want you to give any inside information or anything like that, but I'm just curious.
No, and that's a great question. After a while, you'll get a trained eye to what you're doing and why you're doing it that way. When I first came on board, I tried to use some grazing formulas. What you want to try to do is, and again, it goes back to having a trained eye, or you can do the old method of clipping transects, and that's what we did within our CS when we were doing rangeland assessments. But the idea is go in there, estimate how many pounds of forage production that you've got, and then know how many pounds of dry matter that your herd unit is harvesting. So when I'm running a large herd unit, 500 plus cows, I'm roughly harvesting 15,000 pounds of biomass a day. So if I go in there and I estimate, I've got 400,000 pounds of biomass on there, I'll multiply that by 35% because I use a 35% grazing coefficient. So I want to try to utilize 35% on there. The old adage of take half, leave half that we've been taught for many, many years, it was a good baseline to work with, but we know more now that if we take half of that, then there's another 25% of that that's going to get peed on, pooed on, laid on. It's going to start to decompose. So at that point, now we've taken actually 75% of that, and we're leaving very little behind. So in my mind, I feel like if I can try to utilize 35% of what I've got on there, then I go from there. So that being said, I'll multiply that 35%, say by 400,000 pounds of dry matter. And then if I'm harvesting 50,000 pounds a day, I'll divide that into that number. That'll give me, 5 to 8 days. And that's a baseline to work with. And that's what I started doing when I first got here. And I stayed with that for a couple of years. But after a while, it's kind of a redundancy system. And so, once you got a developed and trained eye to what you're doing, what you want to be able to do is just go in there and see how much they're taking and where do you want it to be at. One of the purposes of the cell grazing concept is we're trying to mimic what the bison did for hundreds and hundreds of years on the North American continent. But the other side of that is that they don't ever tell you that when the bison left, it was basically denuded of vegetation. Okay, there was bare ground, there was blowing dust. They took care of it because there were literally millions of head in a herd unit, and so the Native Americans understood that because that was basically their walking commissary, and they followed the bison but they also realized that the bison would always come back to where there was good forage. And so that being said, what I try to do with my way of thinking is, yes, we're trying to mimic what the bison did. We're trying to have large units on small paddocks. But the other side of that is, again, I've got to leave something behind for that to start again the next following season. So that's what I've always got in the back of my mind when I'm grazing these paddocks, and trying to utilize what's there. But again, I don't want to overutilize.
So how did you arrive at that 35%? You said conventional wisdom was to do a 50% ratio. Where did you make that adjustment to 35%?
Well, because I started noticing that, there's another 25% that they pee on, they poo on, they walk on, they break it down. And again, you want that. I mean, that is dead litter cover that you have on your soil. So, and again, anything that's breaking down, that's being turned into organic matter. And, I know the carbon buzz is the big buzzword anymore. But the fact is, if you've got covered soil, you've got cooler temperatures, you've got better biology in your soil. And so for me, that was kind of the aha moment, I guess, for lack of a better term, was, if I leave something more behind than making it look like it had been grazed, then I've got a better outcome of, say, water infiltration, better water utilization, and I've got some wiggle room, I guess, for lack of a better term, in case we do get dry, because I've had to utilize those pastures during these drought years where we've had to go back into them and graze them multiple times during the season. But if I'd overutilized them during the drought all at one time, then I would not have had any stockpiled forage on the ranch.
So this is your own observations that you kind of created, this moving away from 50% to 35% grazing.
Yes.
This is a chance, like, is it a gamble, do you think, that you did that, or is this just like you felt really comfortable with that decision and you just moved there organically?
I'll tell you this. One of the things that I look at, I do a lot of fence line observations, and I look at a lot of places when I'm driving down the highway. And it's not a dig on anybody else, but when I look at my paddocks and I see that, hey, you know what? I don't have any bare ground. I don't have blowing soil. I've got some decent species coming back in that hadn't been there for many, many years. And one of the observations that I see is, and I always joke, I've got an 11-year-old son that he's probably going to be a bigger grass nerd than his dad. And he and I will look at a pasture and he'll come to me and say, "Daddy, they've been on there too long." And and to me, I feel like that I've instilled that into him. But where I was going with this is, as I'm driving down the road, if I could see a golf ball at 100 yards in a pasture, I'm thinking something is not right there, and maybe we need to readjust our way of thinking about utilization on those pastures.
Yeah, well, I mean, it makes sense, and so on that level, you're driving around comparing your ranch to other ranches in your area. How is that your particular ranch performing as opposed to neighbors? Because you mentioned something about it, so I was curious about, in a drought area, you managing this way, if there's a noticeable difference.
One of the biggest takeaways that I get from our community and some of the producers in our area, and this is not a brag or anything like that, but I've had multiple producers over the years at church or in a community setting say, "We don't know what you're doing, but we've never seen that much grass on that ranch before." And we're not doing anything better than anybody else. We're just doing something different than what had been done on this ranch. And to me, I take a lot of pride in that we're doing something different. I know at one time we had heard all the way to New Mexico how we had ruined this ranch and cut it up into multiple little pastures, and the family would be horrified. But one of the things that we feel like is we feel like we've done better by the operation, and that's that was our whole goal and objective for that, was to make it better than what we found it.
So I know that water management and drought management is something that is a conversation everywhere west of the Mississippi. Especially over the last 14 years, it's been hit or miss drought conditions throughout the entire West Coast. Um, if I'm a rancher out there and I'm curious about what you're talking about, how would I learn about it?
One of the things, the best resources to start with is with your local NRCS office. Go there first. Start with your land grant universities. Start there with their ag department. Start with your AgriLife. I know you're in Boise, Idaho, but we have Texas AgriLife here, and I work a lot with the extension agents. Y'all have extension agents probably at your different universities. That's where I would start at. As a new landowner, one of the things that I used to work with as new landowners would come into our office. A lot of them came in with a laundry list of goals and objectives and pie in the sky dreams for their places because somebody told them, hey, it'll do this, this, and this, and the realtor said, hey, you can do this on there, and I hated to do it, but I was the guy in the office that said, no, you can't. It just your forage production will not allow you to do those things unless you want to cover it up with inputs. And what we talk about with our operation is that we're sustainable, but we're what you would call a minimal input operation. I mean, my cows get a little supplemental feed in the wintertime. They get a little supplemental. They get mineral, and then I do some brush control, and I'll do chemical applications or mechanical applications. But as far as putting a lot of inputs into it, we try to stay away from that. And that's what I used to tell those new landowners when they came in there. Try to develop a 3-year plan of goals and objectives, and then try to develop a 5-year plan of goals and objectives. And again, that's where working with your local NRCS and extension. There's a wealth of knowledge there. A lot of these people that actually work in these offices are producers themselves. And I know when I worked for USDA, I ran cattle, had lease country. So I had a little skin in the game, I guess, for lack of a better term. So I could appreciate what some of these people were trying to do.
Does the NRCS teach on the level that you're, because I mean, from the sound of it, you've made tweaks and adjustments to even what the NRCS does. Is that sort of a newer methodology, or is that something just, they work with that already? I'm curious about that part of it. Like if somebody wanted to take a look at how you're managing things, or if you learned from somewhere else that you used as a resource.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, and that's a great question. And again, I said it earlier. I'm not a very smart person, but I try to surround myself by very intelligent people. And I wasn't blessed with a good memory, so I have notepads of everything, and so I try to write it down. But I try to utilize and try to glean as much information out of the people that I surround myself with. And but also I learned quite a bit when I was with USDA. But again, I had many years in agriculture prior to going to work for that, and I didn't always agree with some of their methodology. But that being said, there's a lot of fine points there that a person can glean from that. And it's like anything else you do in life. You're going to have people that are totally different backgrounds, but you have something in common with them, and you might try to get something out of that. One of the things I've learned over the years is I have a strong work ethic. So I always said I had a strong back and a weak mind. And but I've tried to surround myself around people that actually knew business and the ins and outs of the business side of it. And managing a ranch is one thing, paying for a ranch is another. So I've always tried to learn from somebody else that had a little more intelligence or had a different outlook, I guess, for lack of a better term, than what I do.
Yeah, well, and speaking of surrounding yourself with smarter people, to anybody listening, with Mike Turner here is our director of marketing here at National Land Realty is Kelly Balderama, who happens to be your cousin. And speaking of smarter people, like I'm grateful to your family for bringing Kelly up right, because I don't think that I could even do what I do without a smarter person like her helping run the show here. So I have to throw a huge shout out to her. She is an absolutely amazing employee here. So
outstanding. I love to hear that. Her mom and daddy did a great job on her, and great family and great cousin. I've watched her grow up from a little girl and to the just outstanding, accomplished woman she is today. You guys are lucky to have her. I'll put it that way.
I would never argue with exactly what you just said. We're extremely lucky to have her. She's an absolutely fantastic marketer. It teaches me daily, and so I have to stay. I have to keep in tune to that, because I learn quite a bit.
Well, that's good. I was trying to tell her when I did my internship, my undergrad, I went to work for Texas Department of Agriculture as a marketing professional. I think was the title they gave us, and I worked a lot with the Go Texan program, and yeah, I wouldn't compete with some of these kids that with the technology they have available to them today, and with what they can do, and Kelly's got such a great personality anyhow, so it's hard not to listen to what she's got to say.
100% agreed. Well, hey, Mike, I told you from the beginning that I was going to budget you for an hour, and I know you're a busy person, and I want to be respectful of your time, but I just want to express my appreciation for you taking this time to chat with me about how you're managing your operation there. So thank you very, very, very much. I very much appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate your time, and look forward to visiting with you again.
Yeah, I would love to. All right, take care.
All right, you too, bud. Thank you.
This concludes episode number 90 for the National Land Realty Podcast, discussing ranch management in drought conditions with Mike Turner of Blue Ranch. You can learn more about land ownership and the buying and selling of land at nationalland.com.